Savings accounts pay little, yet prices keep rising and government debts are exploding. This is not coincidence, it's financial repression, a time-tested solution where governments and central banks ensure that real interest rates are negative. They try to conceal this via artificially low inflation indexes, but the reality is a stealth transfer of wealth from savers to debtors. In other words, it redistributes wealth from the public to the central banking cartel and the government. But what is taking place right now is far more than financial repression. Persistent structural inflation has made saving impossible for so many, turning quiet repression into outright wealth expropriation. The effects are broad-based and socially regressive, which goes far beyond a technical debt management tool. It is that which we will discuss in this video as we expose how wealth is being expropriated across different generations in real time. Many commentators point to the post-World War II precedent in managing the debt to GDP level. However, it's not really a great analogue for today when you consider the following reasons. First, the debt composition was different. Then, debt was overwhelmingly domestic. Today, it's globally traded and subject to market volatility. This makes repression far leakier. Second, the working age population is no longer expanding as it was post-war. Capital is now being deliberately advanced to replace labour rather than complement it, which was evident in the post-war productivity boom. Third, inflation today is deeply entrenched via supply chain dynamics, deglobalisation and fiscal largesse, which makes it structural rather than cyclical, as was the case when the war ended. Fourth, private balance sheets, both corporations and households, are far more leveraged while they were relatively clean post-war. Today is an issue of managing debt in a stagnating, aging, open capital world with the added weaponization of taxation. The current playbook consists of two distinct categories. The first being inflation, fiscal drag and indirect taxes. The second being a risk transfer through pensions, forced holding of government debt, and central banks socialising the losses of their sovereign debt via taxpayer backstops. This is because sovereign debt risk is being socialised, as we've considered in detail here. In combination, state balance sheet risk is being transferred to private companies and households, while revenue is being stolen via visible and hidden taxation. Use the chapter sections to go to the demographic that is most relevant to you, and I'll outline all of them via a table comparison, which I'll put on my Substack, so the link will be below. First, boomers are often considered protected asset owners due to the largely illiquid wealth that is held by them. Yet key target mechanisms include under-indexed pensions, which fail to actually keep pace with inflation, and their real income erosion is being compounded year after year. Estate taxation is another key concern, given the priming that is taking place via MSM for hefty inheritance and wealth taxes. Then there's their forced exposure towards sovereign debt risk. Pension funds, where much of this group's wealth is stored, are chock-a-block full of government debt at negative real yields. This demographic are involuntary creditors of the state. Healthcare and care costs are also facing rampant inflation. Now, this greatly erodes saving and inheritances, while government benefits are quietly being reduced. Now, we considered boomers in detail in this video, and I'll link to that at the end. Gen Xers are aggressively squeezed on all sides. Rising taxes, stagnating wages, and leveraged balance sheets. They also face a deteriorating retirement outlook. Key tools of expropriation include fiscal drag. So given that they're in their mid to late career stage, Gen X are being harder hit via frozen tax thresholds, while inflation pushes their far too modest salary increases into higher tax brackets. They also face the housing affordability trap. Many are still paying mortgages and have had to refinance at higher rates from the previous ZERP era. Now, a direct transfer is therefore taking place to the financial oligarchy, while property taxes have been increased far beyond inflation rates. Retirement insecurity is also a key issue. This should be a period at which they are enjoying peak savings. Yet pensions yield little in real terms, and much of the capital is being shoveled into sovereign debt that is undermined by inflationary policies. Dual pressures are affecting this demographic because they have the burden of supporting children and their aging parents, while their own disposable income is being eroded. Sadly, millennials are the lost asset generation. They're facing steep taxation, sluggish wages, and no asset price windfall. They've had late entry and bad timing, entering adulthood post-2008 with high debt loads, sluggish economic growth, and asset prices often inflated beyond reach. That has meant they've faced a housing shutout. Home ownership within this demographic has collapsed, leaving them exposed to perpetual rent inflation as housing has been increasingly financialized, while at the same time significant supply constraints have been maintained on property building. They're also taxed without assets. Millennials don't even have asset pools to be taxed upon, but they still face consumption taxes, higher rates of student debt repayment, and bracket creep. Work insecurity is another issue. Their employment situation is precarious for many, and they face few employer-backed protections. Compounding this, the retirement outlook, which is deteriorating, because if they have pensions, they're again stockpiling government debt, which will again guarantee poor returns amidst financial repression. Even worse, Gen Z is starting even further behind than any generation since World War II. The key emphasis here is one of debt, weak wage prospects, and few entry points into asset ownership. Debt from the outset is a real issue. Student loans and rising education costs have ensured that they begin their careers in negative net worth. Precarious jobs and weak wages pose another problem. Starting salaries have been eroded by inflation and bracket creep. With high rental costs, the prospect of saving for a down payment on a property is being greatly undermined. Consumption taxation is felt hard upon this group, whether it's sales or energy costs. Much of their income will go on necessities, and they have no asset buffer. Without assets or home equity, it means their minimal savings will be entirely exposed to policy-induced inflation and further government revenue grabs. Now, one potential saviour for this group was the prospect of inheritance. However, as boomers' wealth is increasingly targeted, potential inheritance gains are also being eroded for this demographic. Sadly, the outlook is deliberately grim. Boomers are harvested, Gen X are squeezed, millennials are excluded, and Gen Z are stranded. But the hardest hit are workers without assets. They face declining real wages, bracket creep, and consumption taxes with no asset protection buffer. Savers reliant on cash or fixed income are next as inflation erodes returns. Asset holders have some protection, but it's offset by wealth, inheritance, and property taxes. In an inflationary environment, borrowers are principal beneficiaries as repayment can be made in devalued currency units, providing rates remain under control. Defences have intentionally been limited, but they remain clear. Equities with pricing power, real assets like land and commodities, portable wealth such as gold and silver, and for some, cryptocurrencies. Focus on tax efficiency such as legal tender bullion, which avoids capital gains. For younger generations, foreign climes with lower costs of living will look increasingly appealing. Yet the strongest inflation hedge is to raise your earning power. It's not glamorous, but it is a defense that can scale. Now, what we're seeing taking place right now goes far beyond financial repression. It is a systemic policy mix of state-sanctioned theft via embedded inflation, fiscal drag, increased taxation, and central banks quietly shifting sovereign debt risks to the public. We all must be critically aware of this. Without action, the implications are brutal. A massive wealth transfer from every generation. We must protect purchasing power with real assets, minimize tax leakages, and engage with debt very carefully. The system is rigged against savers and workers. Defense, therefore, must be an ongoing discipline, not a one-time fix. Now, thank you so much for joining me. Do check out these other videos on the channel, as well as the Substack, which summarizes the entirety of this video. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.